Hello, my guest today is a good friend of mine, Liz Clawson. Liz is a double bass player based out of Chicago, and earlier this year I had the great opportunity to work with her on a new piece of music for double bass and guitar. As always, remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment, and if you like my content generally and would like to support it, please consider visiting my Patreon page. Welcome to Music in Mind with Anthony Caulkins. Hello. So we're here today with an old friend of mine, Liz Clawson. We must have met like almost 10 years ago, right? About something like that in music school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Liz is a bass player, and do you consider yourself tied to any specific like genre or anything like that? Like
not really.
Classical bass player.
I was always. I would say I'm a classical bass player, but I was sort of taught to not limit myself to any genre. Richard always tells people.
Who's Richard Davis?
My bass teacher. Yeah. That you play the bass.
Yeah.
So when people ask, I just say I play the bass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Do you? But you gravitate towards classical music, would you say?
I would say that's probably the genre I'm most comfortable in because that's the genre I've had the most education in and the most time.
Sure. Most
ensembles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you have a degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Yes.
A graduate degree in bass.
In music education.
Oh.
With a certificate in entrepreneurship. A lot of the music majors didn't know that about me, but I was actually also getting a certificate. It's kind of like a minor. It was about 15 credits.
Okay.
So I was over in the business school for one class a semester.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I've been talking to a lot of people about the importance of entrepreneurship for music. Do you feel like that program helped you a lot? So
I was an odd duck, I guess, during my schooling and just, I guess, in life in some ways. Like a lot of people have not really understood why I chose to do a lot of the things I do. Mm-hmm. For me, I sort of label myself as a musician, an educator, and an arts administrator because I do things in all three of those fields. Mm-hmm. And I sort of realized in high school that someone had to run things. And I was like, maybe I could do that. Like, maybe I would be good at that. Yeah. But there was no real way for me to figure out how to do that in undergrad. So I got into school, and I wanted to do music education because I knew that I wanted the skills to teach. Mm-hmm. I wasn't sure that public school teaching was going to be the right fit for me. I really don't like waking up early. When I was student teaching, I had to wake up at like 4:30 in the morning. It was really... It's this thing. It's so hard. Mornings. I have the same thing. It's like I'll stay out late, I'll play late, and I don't want to get up early. And as a musician, it's tough because you often have gigs at night and on weekends. So like if you're teaching public school and you're trying to gig, that can be very exhausting. Yeah. Plus the class sizes are so big. For me, it's a stimulus thing too, like having... in a public school orchestra program, your combined orchestra for high school is probably anywhere from 25 to 75 kids. 75? Yeah, and so like that one of my schools was close to that size for the sophomore through senior orchestra. They have the freshman orchestra and then they have the combined high school orchestra. And it's overwhelming to have that many kids in front of you, to not have like a planning period. Luckily we did, but a lot of the jobs I was looking at, you wouldn't have that. And so you just have to come in and... Yeah, exactly. You just have to kind of plan around that in your schedule. You may not have a home room for the elementary school position in the same district, which came open right around the time when I graduated. I considered taking it, but I would have had 3 to 5 schools I would have been traveling between with no homeroom and no prep period and about 20 kids at each school. So it was just... I didn't think it was the most ideal. And I knew from teaching in that district that their elementary school program met in the mornings at 6:30. So again, it was before school that the elementary school kids would have their stuff. So it was just not ideal. I felt like it wasn't the right fit, but I wanted those skills, knowing how to scaffold, how to plan a lesson, understanding how people learn at different ages and what's appropriate. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Those are skills I still use all the time in everything I do. And then I didn't know how to do the arts admin stuff, so I started doing the certificate in entrepreneurship because it fit into my schedule. I realized early on that getting into the business school and doing a double major would not work. It would be too much work and it would be really difficult. So this was kind of my balance where I got to take like intro to finance, intro to accounting, intro to business management, all that stuff. Yeah, and it was kind of nice that it wasn't focused on arts. It was just sort of general business because it gave me a different perspective. And then at the same time, one of the reasons I was so thankful I went to the University of Wisconsin is because I got to start doing arts admin during my undergrad.
Okay.
So I was the orchestral librarian for a few years, and that was great because I learned a lot about what librarians have to do. I got sort of a back-end view of the orchestra, and then also I was working for the Wisconsin Union Theater.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it's
cool.
A lot of the bass studio worked for them.
I remember.
Yeah, we kind of had a little political machine of bass players that would all work at the Union Theater.
Is that still true?
I don't think it is, unfortunately.
Okay.
I think the dynasty died with me. We didn't have many undergrads after me. There was sort of a lull. We had a couple, but I think that was kind of where it ended for us. But it was great because I learned so much about touring artists and booking concert series and sort of all of the logistics, the administrative side of things.
Yeah.
And I started to get a first-hand feel for it. They're very good about letting students do all the programming. I was planning the artists' itineraries. I was introducing them at concerts.
That's great.
Yeah, so I was really getting first-hand skills from an early age.
It also helps you if you're trying to book later.
Yes.
It shows you what it's like on the other end.
I got a good understanding of a few parts of arts admin. And then I went on to the summer after I graduated. I was just looking for the next step, the next job.
2014?
Yeah. So in the summer of 2014, I was looking for a job, and I ended up working part-time for the Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra
nice.
as an assistant stage manager. So I was driving their truck.
Yeah, I remember that job listing. Yeah. I remember seeing it.
It was a lot of fun. I'd never driven a truck before, so I was really nervous, but I got the hang of it. I had a good co-driver. A great stage manager.
So what did you drive? Was this like hauling equipment to gigs and stuff?
It was
concerts?
Yeah, it was like all the chairs and stands. They had a different organization that set up the actual stage and all of the sound equipment.
Okay.
That was all the sound guys. It was a different company.
Yeah.
And then we would come in once they set up the stage, and we would set up all of the chairs and stands, all of the sandbags because they're outside to make sure the stands don't fall over. All of the sound shields for the musicians, like if you're near brass players and it's too loud. All the percussion equipment, all of that stuff was our job. And then I would help to make sure that we stayed on time, that our breaks were 15 minutes long, that kind of stuff, all the union regulations. Yeah. So again, I got like another view of how orchestras run from a very first-hand place. And then I worked at a local music store for a year. I worked at Ward Brought. Oh. So then I got another view of like...
Good Madison spot.
Yeah, a typical Madison spot. So I got a view of like how school runouts go, how you size kids for instruments, how a lot of local music stores work with schools to do rentals and things like that. And I got some very basic knowledge of like electric guitars and electronics and pianos and drum kits and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I went and did my master's in performance in Tucson.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's my long...
How was that?
That was very interesting. So I had this administrative experience, very basic stuff, and I had my ed degree, but I felt like I wasn't getting to focus as much on performing, and I missed it. And so I wanted a chance to just focus on that for a while. And it was actually a perfect blend for me. The teacher there, his name is Phil Alejo.
Okay.
And he knew Richard, my undergraduate professor, through Richard's youth-based conference. He has a youth-based conference every Easter.
Okay.
So that's how I knew Phil. And Phil had studied with a woman named Diana Gannett, who I really admire, and I had really wanted to study with her, but she was kind of coming to the end of her time at Michigan, University of Michigan.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to be able to make it before she retired.
Yeah.
And Phil had an open assistantship. So I was going to be able to go back to school and not be in debt and work with someone who
perfect.
really knew like the style that I was going
Yeah.
for, who I really admired and I got along well with.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a great working relationship, and I got to focus more on my playing. And the nice thing about being a teaching assistant is that I got to teach in different arenas. So I was
Right.
teaching really young beginning violin students
Okay.
in like their local string project.
Sure.
Yeah.
Fun. Yeah.
Violin and cello, and I had one bass player who was about 8 or 9. He was
So the bass is like...
his family bought him a half-size bass, and I
Okay.
was so nervous the first lesson because I had to hold it by the scroll, so it wouldn't. He could barely hold the instrument
Yeah.
up, and I was afraid that it was just slightly too big for him.
Yeah.
But it just barely worked, and then by the second lesson, he was holding it himself, like he wasn't wobbling
Yeah,
so much.
that's good.
He had worked on his stance.
That's so much fun.
Yeah, it was really fun
Young bass
to get to
students.
like start a kid and see how he grew.
It's fun, the idea of having a kid build those bass sensibilities young.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's my problem as a guitar player where people are like, can you play bass, guitar? I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Kind
sort
of.
of. Like, I can technically play it, but I don't think about it right. I don't
Yeah.
have the right sensibilities.
That's kind of how I even feel as an upright bass player playing
Yeah.
electric bass, is that I didn't have many lessons on electric bass. I don't feel like I play it right.
Right.
Which, like, there is no right way to do anything, really.
Yeah.
There's like a typical practiced way, but that's not necessarily like the best
Yeah,
for
people
everyone.
play it all sorts of ways.
Yeah, and I can read music and I can play it, but I play it like an upright. So I think across and up
With a bow.
a lot more. Yeah. Then I think like I think on the electric bass you have to think across in blocks more, and that's not the first way my brain works when I think bass.
It's the problem I have when writing for violin.
Yeah.
And actually, and upright bass. I don't know if you've noticed how I write, but I think for all string instruments in like positions.
Yeah, because that's a lot of the way we're taught. But the way we're taught positions on the upright, I think, is different than on the electric. And so I think like I'm playing an upright on the electric. So I'm not the most efficient, I guess. And I don't feel as strong when it comes to improvising or creating my own bass lines in terms of, I think a lot in fifths, which is fine, and octaves, but I don't think, and like a little bit thirds, but I don't think like in sixths as much. I don't think
like
in
filling
like,
out.
Yeah, I don't think across as much. I think sort of up, over and up, which is more how like an orchestral bass player would play a lot of things, I think, or like how you're first taught to play the bass.
Yeah. So I also have a master's degree, and I'm always like, I'm a little ambivalent about what it's for.
Yeah.
So because I'm in this spot where all of the jobs I do, I don't need any degrees for.
Yeah.
No one ever asks me about a degree. So I never, like, the value of a music degree is weird. I don't know.
I think the value of a music degree doesn't fit into like American consumer society because it's not.
Well, there's no job, there's no direct payout. Yeah.
For me, a music ed degree it had a direct payout in that I got a license from the state at the end.
Yeah.
And I don't have that license anymore. I didn't keep up with it. But that was sort of like, there is a known value. But I think there's a lot of intrinsic value. And for me, that was a big part of why I went and got my master's, was like, life is short and I care about this thing and I want to do it to the best of my abilities. And this was a way for me to focus on something I cared about. But I had a lot of privilege in that I got an assistantship. So I didn't have to take on debt to do that.
Yeah,
I couldn't have done that otherwise.
Yeah.
And
it also seems like you were in a program that was really, like, you wanted the learning experience with the teacher and the pushing you to perform more.
Yeah.
And it seems like you had a program that was good for that.
I wanted to grow my skills, and I had a person who understood my previous learning and was able to take me to the next level in a really good way.
Do you feel like your master's was a way for you to learn more, or a way for you to start to sort of be yourself, so to speak? Or both, maybe?
A little bit of both. I think for me it was a lot more of a technical foundation.
Okay.
My undergraduate teacher, Richard, he's very focused on the individual and sort of cultivating the individual sound and style. And so I think I had already done a lot of that, but I think I felt like I was lacking a lot of technical foundation.
Yeah.
And so Phil was able to do a lot of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the composition program at UW-Madison was like that too. So the person I worked with was Steve Dembski, and it was a similar kind of thing. He didn't want to tell you what to do, just sort of help you do what you want to do. But then I came out like, I don't know how to write a song, I don't know how to write a fugue, I don't know what's considered the basic technique of composition.
Yeah, I look back at videos of myself at the end of my undergraduate, and I feel like I was such a strong player in that I was so musical, and I was really good at projecting and sort of like putting myself into my music. But I feel like I lacked some technical skills, like in thumb position, I collapsed a lot.
Sure.
Things like that, so hand frame stuff. Yep. And Phil really drove that stuff in with me. And now I feel like I'm having to reverse and kind of, I took a long time off, so I'm kind of rebuilding those skills, but also trying to find my voice again in my playing.
So you just went on like a mini tour, right? With Eric. Yeah, Eric Chippew, the classical guitar player. He's in Rochester right now, right? Okay, cool.
So Eric DeBellew is at Rochester. I met him at the same time of that I met you, or a couple years later. He was doing his master's while I was finishing my undergrad. So all three of us were at Wisconsin together. And then he went to Eastman to study. And he texted me about a year ago, and he was like, hey, I want to do some duos. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, and I'll one-up you. Do you want to play at the International Society of Bassists convention? We could apply and do a recital there. So he was like, okay, I'm game. And then I was like, knowing kind of the ISB, something that always helps a presentation is to have something that's very different from what's typically presented. And guitar and bass duos are not typically presented. There's not as much chamber music often presented at the bass conference. So
there's a lot of solos?
A lot of solo stuff, a lot of stuff on teaching or things like that. Master classes, there's lots of master classes. There's competitions that are going on. They have jazz, classical, a composition competition, which you entered once. And and other things like that going on. And so we had a unique presentation, and then we also, I knew that if we did a premiere, that would help as well. So then I roped you in to write us a piece. And I felt comfortable doing that because we had worked together before. And I actually think that the way you write for bass is good compared to a lot of composers who don't have a background with the bass. They just don't know. They have sort of only whatever they got during their composition courses. And a lot of that can be a bit of misinformation. And so...
I mean, a lot of composers don't think about how it's going to be played.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't think about the timbre of the instrument or the volume of the instrument. And this was a perfect duo because the bass...
Did it work, by the way?
It worked really well.
That's great.
Yeah, it worked very well.
I haven't heard it yet. So.
We were really worried because... like putting it together, we just wanted it to sound very good, you know, and like I was working all week. I also worked at the bass conference. So like I was kind of running on low the night before and we were practicing and I was just very nervous about like, is this going to fit together well? Is it going to come off well? But it did.
So there was another premiere too, right?
Just that. Yeah. That was the only premiere. One of the other pieces we played had already been premiered, but there was no recording of it. There was just a recording of one of the movements, and we did two of the three movements. It's by Sarana Chow. So that was the other piece that was kind of like new to audiences. And both your pieces were interesting because they both required extended techniques. Hers requires us to tap on the bodies of our instruments, and yours required us to do sort of like left hand or right hand taps on the strings.
So do you consider that an extended technique?
I do because it's not something that comes across regularly in a lot of bass pieces, and it's not something that like necessarily we study to do in school.
That makes sense.
Or not extensively, at least.
I have this kind of thing against the idea of extended techniques. Like, just it's a thing, you do it, you know.
I just label anything that's sort of outside of the and I hate to say regular canon, but like outside of like the basics as an extended technique. Even thumb position I would consider an extended technique. So on the bass, when you go up above the neck and you start to use your thumb, I consider that an extended technique. So anything that's outside of like the very basics.
I guess I was thinking of it as almost an electric bass technique.
Yeah,
that's how I was
mirror
that.
It. Yeah. The thumb slapping and stuff.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And to me, it mirrors a lot of the early bass playing on upright, where you're you're slapping at the same time that you're
like
pitching.
The gypsy jazz stuff.
Yeah, or like early jazz a lot of times. Preamplification.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. Well, I'm glad it worked.
Yeah, so that went well. We presented a few pieces, about 50 minutes worth of music. Mm-hmm. We did a recital at ISB, and then we did a group muse here in this room in Chicago. And group muse is where you have people come into your house, and you can present a recital to them of whatever kind of chamber music or solo music you would like. And they pay you. So it's a great way for musicians who maybe don't have as much power to book in a larger venue to still get their music heard, to still present, and to get some payment, which is good because Eric was coming from New York to the Midwest to play with me. Yeah. And then we went up to Madison, and we played at a senior home. Mm-hmm. And we played at a local bar for a happy hour. Mm-hmm. Those were both interesting because, again, we have two very quiet instruments, and we were playing two very contemporary pieces. So the chow and your piece both required like some slapping. Mm-hmm. They are somewhat atonal or have outside of like the Western, like very typical tonality. Mm-hmm. It's not all about 5/1. Yeah. You know. And then we played Spanish dances, and we also played a piece that's very like Eastern European in style. Okay. So those two were received well by the older folks in the senior home, but they really did not like the contemporary pieces.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It was kind of stressful when we showed up. I was like, this is not a good idea. Yeah, one lady... I hate to say this, but one lady at the end of your piece was like, play that a little more upbeat next time.
Upbeat?
Yeah, she just didn't like, I don't know what she was expecting. I think she thought we were playing it wrong or something. Yeah.
That's good.
And every time Eric spoke to the audience at the senior home, this one woman in the front kept going like this and rolling her eyes.
Wow.
Like she didn't want him to talk. Yeah, so that was it.
Just like, all right.
A good reminder that there are certain pieces that are better received by certain audiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but still worth doing. There were plenty of people at the senior home who really enjoyed it, so it was definitely a mixed bag. Yeah. Well received at ISB, though. People really liked.
That's cool.
I think because, again, there's not as much chamber music presented. Mm-hmm. People really like thinking about ways bass can be part of chamber music. And it's something that's becoming more part of my life as a performer, too. Now that I'm out of school, I have the option of going through the very laborious process of getting into regional orchestras through auditions. Yeah. And while I will do that, because I do love orchestral music, it's nice to do chamber music because I have a lot more independence. I get to choose who I play with and what I play, and I get to really pursue stuff that I find interesting and meaningful. Yeah, so
build a connection.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the thing that's interesting about group muse to me.
Yeah.
Especially for like the chamber music world. And I think it's interesting how scenes and communities are built with music. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's this whole thing in classical music where people are very disconnected from audiences. Yes. Even orchestras. The orchestra comes on stage and the audience is there, and there's like something kind of like perfunctory about it. Yes. And not engaging.
There's sort of a tradition that's still there. I think in the same way that a lot of people feel like they need to get jazz, that there's something to understand. Right. And that sort of builds up this barrier between the audience and the performers. I think classical music has that too, that people feel that it's not for them because they have to understand something, or even more so that they don't look like anyone who's performing, or that the composers don't represent them. They're old. Yeah. They're all older European dead white dudes. Yeah, so like that's not America anymore in a lot of ways, or it's only one small portion of America. Yeah. I think that affects audiences as well. Even for me, even though I have the privilege of being white as a woman, I don't see, I think it was I didn't play a piece written by a female composer till college, if even then.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably not everybody, but most people's experience.
And lots of orchestras have, like in the top 10 symphony orchestras, I think we have about 8 women out of about 100. If you have about, or 80. So if you have about
bass
8,
sections, you mean?
Yeah, sorry, for bass sections. So if you
Okay.
have about 8 to 10 players in an orchestra and 10 orchestras, maybe, there's one, maybe, if you're lucky. And so I didn't see myself either.
Right,
and
course,
even as someone who studied classical music and who has a very built-in love for it, it's hard to feel like it's for you.
Right, you're disconnected from it.
Yeah. And it was interesting to step into hip-hop because at the end of my undergraduate, one of our other friends who you interviewed and who was in the composition studio was Max Perkins, who plays drums, and like he and I were in a hip hop band together that was a very large group of students. It wasn't music majors; it was a lot of creative writing majors.
Right.
And they made some of the most interesting and impactful music, like some of the best art I had ever experienced, and I was so thankful to get to be part of that. But also, like, our music was naturally relevant to people. We didn't have to argue for why we should exist or why we should be there. People just came and they felt an experience, with us. And that was very eye-opening, coming from a very like classical background of like, how can orchestras be more like this?
Yeah.
So it's something I think about all the time from an arts administration background too, is like, how can we really start to change our model for orchestras?
Do you have an idea?
Oh, well, there's so many things that are happening now.
Right.
In the past 10 years or so, a lot of orchestras have gone bankrupt.
Yeah.
A lot of them have seen their traditional model sort of fade away, which is that you have subscribers who buy tickets in bulk at the beginning of the season.
Right.
And that helps you to amass a certain amount of money through ticket sales at the beginning of the season. And then you also have endowments. And a lot of people donate. They give you large sums of money. A lot of foundations donate. And all of those things are shrinking at the same time. Endowments are getting smaller. People are not leaving their wills. They're not leaving like tons of money to orchestras. Or they don't have the giving power. Our tax structure has changed so that it doesn't benefit people in the same way that it used to. And at the same time, like, our generation doesn't even subscribe really to newspapers. No. Or anything. So it's hard to...
No, content should be free.
How do you convince someone who thinks content should be free to pay to go see an orchestra?
I have no idea.
Yeah, so that model is changing.
And orchestras are expensive.
There's so much cost that goes into an orchestra that people really don't think about. Even aside from the musicians, who are a very important cost, that they spend their whole life learning this thing at an extremely high level. And, you have to pay a salary that compensates for the amount of work that's being done. Right. But also there's things like just having a theater operating for 2 hours is extremely expensive.
Yeah, of course.
The cost of the lighting and all of the union workers who have to do all of the stage management and all of the sound system and all of that stuff is extremely expensive too. So it's interesting to see the way people are trying to capture younger audiences. I think the other thing that people don't realize is that a lot of orchestras are reporting more first-time concert goers than ever. But they're just not coming back. They're just coming once. It's like an experience, that you try once. So how do you get that audience to come back is a whole nother thing.
So do you think orchestras are important?
I do. I think that orchestras matter, and I really think it's silly when people say that classical music is dead.
Sure.
I don't think it is. I think it's
calling
struggling.
it classical music is probably a good way to make it sound dead.
Yeah. And again,
it sounds old. It sounds like it's from back then.
Yeah. Going back to genres, it's like really tough to say. I just think genres can be very limiting sometimes too. Yeah. And classical music, a lot of contemporary or modern classical music doesn't sound like classical music to us anymore. Right. And so to say that it's dead, I think it's just changed in a lot of ways. Things are changing.
Yeah. There is an aspect to a lot of big orchestras that feels sort of dead or museum-y to me. Especially when it's put in relief where they do the one contemporary piece. Yes. And so they're still doing all the Liszt and Brahms and blah, blah, blah. And then, they have their one piece for a concert, or they're like 5 pieces for a season or something. And then it seems like they're putting into relief how dead they are.
Yes. And this is interesting that you bring this up because, again, this was something I struggled with a lot and started to think about during my undergrad working at the Union Theater, is that I am representing the student body in that role, and I'm getting to help choose the concert series for the next year. So I'm thinking about what would entice a person my age to go to a classical concert. Like, what do young people want? And I asked a bunch of kids in the music school and within my own network what they wanted. And that sort of swayed my decision to include Rachel Barton Pine in the following year, to kind of push to bring her, because she was someone that a lot of them liked, knew about, felt was relevant. And then there were other things I really wanted that we couldn't do. I gave a bunch of suggestions for 2 years out because it was like our 85th season, or a very big anniversary season, so we had to plan ahead of time. And there were arguments about, or not arguments, but discussions about, like, what are subscribers going to want? What's going to get butts in seats that pay for tickets? And I was like, well, who are we serving? Are we serving those subscribers, or are we serving the student body? What's our goal here? What is our mission? Because they inherently want different things. I wanted to bring Eighth Blackbird because they had just won a Grammy. They're very young.
You weren't able to?
They're very hip. Yeah, there was some pushback that
I see.
They might fit the model of things that we would be interested in bringing, but that subscribers would not be as interested. Older audiences. I know, I was surprised. And then another group that we ended up bringing.
Like a mistake.
Yeah, it does to me.
I understand the mentality. Like, it makes sense that you need the money.
You want something
but it's
safe.
Like, it's this chasing your audience. I think it's always a mistake. And then everything gets worse when you do it.
The other funny thing is we were looking for someone to come and play with us and with the local symphony to do a week-long residency, and on either end, sort of like bookends, have
Madison
concerts.
Symphony?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they were very interested in bringing Emmanuel Axe, and we wanted people who had a history with us. So Yo-Yo Ma has played with the Union Theater, Emmanuel Axe has. There were names like that were being brought out, and I was the youngest person in the room. And I kept saying, like, you know, every year when you look at the Madison Symphony's list, the only soloists that they often have are pianists, cellists, and violinists. And it's not just them. It's pretty much every orchestra does that.
Well, it's all the good concertos.
That's like the good, that's what we value. But again, it's like we're stuck in this sort of system that's what gets butts in seats. But it gets boring. I'm not sure that our audience, like younger people, are as interested.
For everybody.
I think it is.
I think it's boring for the old people too. I think it's everyone sitting there going, when this is over, can we go get a drink? Can we go get ice cream? And they're just waiting for it.
But I'm not one of those people. I'm a bass player.
What do they love?
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't get it, but
in the same way that, like, a lot of the classical canon has, like, very lovable, meaningful moments. There's things I love about Beethoven and Brahms, but I don't want to just hear that forever and always. Exactly. So it's like thinking about this idea of, like, how do we structure an environment that's more comfortable for people? How do we sort of make orchestras represent the audience in a more meaningful way? And what we're booking sort of represent people's interests? Who are we serving? Those types of things. What is
music about?
Yeah.
I mean, it's this thing where, like, to me, music is about a communication between people.
Yeah.
It's like, so I have a lot of friends who work in artificial intelligence and music. So I have a friend.
In music?
Yeah, I have a friend who's building a robot that scores films. Really, like, it watches the film and it can recognize characters and it can make leitmotifs for different characters.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy, but also, I don't give a shit about a score written by a robot.
Yeah.
Like, it's neat. It's, like, cool to hear once, but I don't care about the music then. I have no connection to it.
And I wonder how it would compare to something that is made by a human.
Right. But that's why I'm interested in it, because a person made it. I'm interested in a person's output. Yeah. I don't care what a robot does.
Exactly. It might be interesting and hip.
It's neat. Yeah. It's like cool. It's a cool trick.
I would have to listen to it to really know if it was something I related to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, it's a whole, I am endlessly fascinated by this problem and in sort of figuring out what the next steps look like. Something that's fascinating that both Madison and Chicago have are outdoor concert series in the summer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to me then, after working at the Union Theater, going to concerts on the Square, which the Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra does every Wednesday night during the summer, they get, I think, audiences sometimes as large as 10 to 15,000 people all the way around the Capitol.
Yeah, that's true.
On the lawn.
Really big, yeah.
But a lot of those people are not there for the music. They're there for the experience.
Yeah, right.
And then they get the music. And it was interesting to work with an executive director who was very understanding of that and understanding of his orchestra, and really wanted to find a way to build something, like build on what they had, this tradition, in a way that was both meaningful for the musicians and like added value for the community.
Yeah.
He was willing to invest in more speakers. I don't know if they ended up with like video monitors, but that was something I think they had discussed, is maybe putting screens at other ends of the Capitol so you could see what was going on.
Good.
I don't think that happened. I haven't been there in a long time. And then like, you know, just making people more aware, or kind of programming things that are meaningful and interesting to those audiences.
Yeah.
The Grant Park Music Festival happens in Chicago down at J. Pritzker Pavilion every summer.
Okay.
And they get thousands and thousands of people, which is interesting because we say classical music is dead and that it's not relevant and people don't care, but that's a free concert that's outside. So many people go.
Yeah.
And you can argue, are they there for the music? And it's like, well, maybe not, but the experience is definitely a more relaxed experience.
Sure.
In an environment that's perhaps more accessible for classical music.
Yeah.
So I think the better question for people is, how do we get this audience that seems so comfortable with this into the concert hall?
Yeah.
Or how do we get them to consume classical music in a way that's meaningful to them? Maybe a concert hall is not the right venue, because clearly so many of them will come to an outdoor concert, but maybe not go to the CSO or to Lyric or other large venues. Yeah. So it's fascinating to look at and think about, and it's really something that like drives me a lot, has always been a big part of why I do arts admin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Think about it all the time. I never really have an answer for what to do with classical music.
I think that's how a lot of big problems go, is there's a lot of small solutions, but how you like change a whole system or a culture is very difficult. Right. So I'm still thinking about it too.
Because like Taylor Swift is obviously highly valuable to our culture.
Is she?
Yeah, everybody loves it. People give all sorts of money.
Or they give her a lot of attention. I'm not sure everyone loves her. Some people love to hear her.
Not everyone loves her, but people are willing to pay a lot of money.
Yeah.
Lots of people are willing to pay a lot of money.
Or Beyonce.
So they're willing, right, exactly. So they're willing to give money, so sort of from an economic idea, like they produce value or something like that.
How can the New York Phil produce the same kind of value that
Beyonce.
Taylor Swift does, or Beyonce? Yeah. Which is
it's hard.
Like, I mean,
they shouldn't produce the same kind of value.
And that's sort of like a business way of looking at it too, which is tough with arts. I don't think arts should be run like a business. Like, you have to think about them differently, of course.
Yeah, I think so.
I think they both have value intrinsically. So like to say that how can one generate value is problematic, because they both generate meaningful value that can't be measured.
That's true.
But then how do you get the same kind of box office output? How do you get the same kind of financial turnaround that Taylor Swift
emotional
has?
connection to it, maybe.
Yeah, or like
more what I'm
how do you break down those barriers that keep people from buying tickets to the CSO when they buy tickets to see Taylor Swift or things like that?
Right.
Yeah.
Like I know people who will spend hundreds of dollars on electronic music festivals, but won't spend a cent on
a classical, and that's a whole interesting
thing. But that's
thing.
okay. I mean, everybody can consume whatever music they want.
Exactly. But then how do you get people to see that there's nothing scary about classical music, or that it's meaningful to them, that it can be meaningful to them?
I think what you were saying before is the idea of there being sort of a right way to understand it and a right way to listen to it is a big problem.
Yeah. And I've always felt that with jazz too. Again, this idea that there's something to get or understand.
Right, like who's going to an electronic music concert and like being like, well, like trying to analyze
they like
everything.
it or they don't. Yeah.
They're in it.
Yeah.
They're vibing with it,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
You can do that with any music.
Exactly. And I think that we're not taught to think about some of the more formal, like studied conservatory genres in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think about it all the time. Yeah.
Cool. So do you have anything else big going on in your life?
So after my master's, I took actually 2 years off from playing bass. So this recent recital was a big deal to me because it was my first time performing live for anyone after 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, so that was like a big emotional thing. I was feeling a lot of anxiety about being rusty and getting back into it. And for a while I was kind of avoiding my instrument because I was feeling so much anxiety. And I was able to work through that, and I'm very proud of how things went. Yeah. You know, they weren't perfect, but when is art ever, and nor should art be perfect. Yeah, I'm not striving for perfection. But I think there were beautiful, meaningful moments, and there were no big train wrecks. We never once like completely lost each other or had a problem. You know, like good. We stayed together and we made meaningful music, and people felt something from it.
Did it feel good playing together? Okay.
Yeah, so that was all positive. And so from here, it's kind of like, what do I do next artistically? But also I'm still working in arts administration. Okay. I work part-time for a local organization that's actually, it's fine arts in general, not just music. So it's interesting because I'm actually their only employee right now, so I'm doing everything. Like I have my hands in everything. Okay. So I'm at the next level administratively where I'm learning how to operate a nonprofit. What do they do? So it's the Chinese Fine Arts Society. Okay. It's a 35-year-old institution in Chicago. And the first thing that they ever did was a music competition, or like a music festival in honor of Confucius. The founder, her name is Barbara Chow. She moved to Chicago. She was a piano accompanist, and she was seeing all these young kids play like Wieniawski and Beethoven and Mozart at such high levels on their instruments, but they didn't know any Chinese music, and she was bothered by that. So she started this competition where there's a pre-approved list of Chinese music, and you can play any Western piece basically, and you play both for the judges, and it was a way to kind of expose young kids to music outside of the Western canon. Yeah. So it's been really cool to help with that. We still do it. We're in our 34th year, I think, of that. And then they do a lot of concerts, like do a regular concert series. They used to, the organization's been a little bit smaller, so we've been a little bit pared back in what we've been doing. But that's something we've traditionally done a lot of, is concert series, and it's something we're going to continue in the future as we grow.
And is it still moving towards like a combination of Western and non-Western music, or does it lean more on Chinese or East Asian music?
There's a lot of Chinese or East Asian sort of composition. Right. There are Western musicians and traditional orchestral instruments that are part of it. So it's sort of a balance of...
Does it incorporate non-Western instruments?
Yes. Okay. So having sort of a balance of Chinese instruments and Western instruments and Chinese music and all that kind of stuff. So it's sort of same vein that we're just trying to... Our mission is to sort of showcase Chinese fine arts at a high level in a way that's meaningful for... Chicago audiences or Midwestern audiences. Yeah. And then the other thing that we do, not the last, but one of many other things we do is a lot of the programming for Chinese New Year in the city of Chicago. Oh, cool. So late January and February are very big months for us. Yeah, we do a lot of stuff. So that's always a lot of fun. And that's all kinds of acts. Chinese yo-yo, acrobatics, martial arts, lion dance, traditional dance, all of that is in addition to musicians is sort of being presented. So
is there a pretty vibrant cross-cultural music scene in Chicago?
Yes, I would say there is. Cool. Or an arts scene.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry, I just think of music, but I don't mean to...
It's interesting for me because I have to get out of my music brain at work. I'm thinking larger arts in general. Yeah. So I think Chicago is blessed with having a very vibrant arts community in general, and that lends itself really well to a cross-cultural arts community as well. And we're lucky that the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, like I've seen them doing a lot of funding and hosting and helping of cross-cultural events. So there's definitely a lot more organizations here that are promoting it. Yeah. So it's been cool to see. Yeah. Sweet. So I'm at a new point in my life where I'm kind of balancing arts administration again, teaching privately, and playing again. Yeah. With arts admin being my 9 to 5 or my 26 hours a week job, and then kind of balancing around that, doing some stuff for other arts organizations administratively, teaching a couple students privately, and then figuring out what I want to do as a performer. So I'm trying still to figure out that balance of not overbooking myself.
Is there anything particular you do want to do as a performer?
Right now, I really do want to explore more chamber music.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and then I want to have a cover band again.
A cover band?
Yeah, I used to have a cover band with Max.
Okay.
We named it after our favorite theory professor, so it was Funk Blasius was our cover band, and we used to do a lot of like funk and soul and Motown tunes.
Great.
So I want to do something like that again in Chicago.
Did you sing?
No, I played bass. Yeah.
That's a quick no.
I get very anxious about my voice in general.
Yeah.
I feel like the bass is a more comfortable voice for me in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that was a good conversation. That was cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Liz. And
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for listening, and remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment, and remember to check out my Patreon page to support my work generally. Thanks. See you next time.